I've called this the dark matter in organisations. And the reason for that is the publication of a new book, The Relational Lens, and that is a metaphor that we carried through in that book. What essentially I want to do in this session is really to talk through some of my journey being here and some of the things that have shaped my thinking along the way, and hopefully you'll find that of interest. So, first of all, we are suffering from a crisis of knowledge. I mean, in the information age, we have so much information that we sometimes don't know what we've got. Okay? But in a way, that's always been true. I mean, if you think it wasn't that long ago when it was clear, it's obvious that the world is flat. And yet we don't believe that anymore, but it still looks pretty flat to me. Okay? And we used to think that time waits for no man. And then someone came along and said, oh, time's not quite as linear as that. It bends and it changes and etc. And so what we know and what we understand is constantly changing. And what we have now with the concept of dark matter is that we see the universe, all the universe that we have thought of, conceptualized, has now been reconceived to being what we have seen is 4% of what's there. 96% of the universe is not seen by us. And look, how do we know that? I know there's a physicist in the room here who will maybe correct some of this along the way, but the universe could not be spiralling in the way it does if it only had the mass of what we can see. Hence the concept of dark matter. So that's the metaphor that I'm going to take through. And when we think about dark matter, we can also think about it psychologically as well. Because if we think about how Jung thought about things, I mean, who in this room would consider themselves to be self-aware? So, and the idea of self-awareness, I mean, if you read Jung, you'll know that he says that people are only aware of their conscious state, of their consciousness, and that there is far more than that behind that. What a sinister picture. That's not the one I'm going to talk about then, but the idea that what we think we know and what is behind that, there is always this divide. When we look at organisations, I'm saying there's the same thing going on. You look at the scene, and what you see is a fraction of what is there. There is so much more, and somehow we haven't seen it, we haven't brought it into our thinking enough, etc. So, let me then tell you a little bit more about my journey to coming here. I mean, I began training people in MBTI back in 1985, I think it was, okay, before OPP got his hands on it and then said, we want to do it all ourselves. So I trained a lot of people in MBTI, and that's what led me to this. I did study as a psychologist, and Jung was an aside in one lecture on Freud. That was it. And there was Jung. I knew nothing. But MBTI got me curious, and I read psychological types. And I must admit, I can't remember it all. In fact, I didn't really come together. But I was struck by how much thinking went into that book. When you read it, you think, wow, this man is trying to understand the human condition. And then I look at what I studied in psychology, and I said, where are the people who are really trying to understand the human condition? Because when I look at what psychologists focus on today, or certainly my branch of psychology, occupational psychology, I think I don't see that curiosity, that intensity, that desire to know. There is a desire to produce a little bit of evidence that will justify a position. that wasn't the only book I read, because there is a very important book which is, Jung wrote this very late in life. I don't know how many people have read it, The Undiscovered Self. Fascinating, simple way of explaining some of these big ideas around people, who we are, how we become what we are, etc. And then Anthony Storr. Anthony Storr is responsible for me standing here, because at school, studying science and thinking, what shall I do? And then I read Anthony Storr on aggression. And because I went to a school where there was a bit of aggression about, I was curious and I thought, I want to know why people get so enraged. That's what led me to psychology. Psychology didn't fulfill its promise, but his book was, and then years later, I read this book. A fascinating study and understanding of how we operate, and something that is critical to the counterbalance that I have with this book. The relational lens and solitude. The need for relationships and the need for detachment and solitude. There's also another book which I've read relatively recently, which has also shaped my thinking. Again by a psychologist, Jerome Kagan, Psychologist Ghost, and in there, again, there are some gems. So I'm not really here as a bookseller, but I thought if you go away with nothing else, there are some books that might stimulate you might find really interesting if you haven't read them. I said that before I then said, and there is also this book, which was only published last year. We had the book launch in October, and it is an attempt to bring together a body of thinking about something which I have always considered important. And if you like, Anthony Storr on aggression, but also that bit in me that says relationships are important. And one of the things in my journey, which was study psychology, because psychology will inform understanding about relationships. And it has sorely let me down. It is not the space that psychology has grasped, and that is part of the theme for the rest of this talk. Along the way then, I studied psychology, and actually I have a label because I have a professional body. I can call myself a psychologist. How many psychologists in the room? A few. I mean, my argument is that we're all psychologists. Okay. And very often the study that goes on in universities is not that illuminating, and some people learn more without ever studying the topic. And everybody in this room has already got a focus on the substance, the nature of psychology. Being a business psychologist, I thought, well, what do I mean when I say I'm a psychologist? Business psychology is the study and practice of improving working life. And I think I can agree with some of that. I can agree with some of that. But I have a very strong reaction when I hear certainly many colleagues, business psychologists, say, I have a passion for increasing your profits, or something like that, because I do not believe it. I do not believe that. That is not why people get out of bed in the morning. And I think that we have a problem because our whole society is focused on goals, things that we're trying to achieve, which are missing the important dark matter of the human condition. So that question, people are a vehicle for profit, which I would say is what most boards in this country say, and in fact probably many of the NHS, the people who run the NHS, somewhere in there is a people thing, but actually people are there to make it work. And what I've done is turn that round. Should profit be for people? Should the organisation be for people? And that is a core theme in the relational lens. Now, I say I've got the label psychologist. Great. But unlike most psychologists, in this room accepted, I met Jung along the way and I didn't spit him out. Because for most of, certainly academic psychology, I would say probably 99% are vitriolic in their condemnation of Jung. And I think, why is it so strong? What is it that's leading to that? So I like to say when I'm a psychologist, but I'm not a mainstream psychologist, and this is one of the reasons, because I have read Jung and I've adopted and understood what he was trying to do, and I think he's got something very much to offer. And in this talk then, I'm going to try and integrate some of Jung's ideas with some of the ideas in the relational lens, because sometimes they look at odds, but as you know, Jung is always making things look at odds and counterbalancing them in some way or another. So some milestones on that journey. Discovering type, as I mentioned. Using MBTI and training people in MBTI. Seeing other people developing things like the JTI and the occupational type profile. I don't know, most people here are probably MBTI users, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
In my journey then, and reading Jung and thinking, what does he really say and what are we not doing in that? I developed something called TDI, Type Dynamics Indicator. Okay? And this is just a little bit of breaking news, and I find it interesting, and I just wanted to tell you, okay, which is that it has been reviewed by the BPS, and developing the TDI was trying to encompass much more of Jung into the practice that I had. Okay? And my dilemma now is in writing the relational lens is that Jung has got some really strong and passionate focus on the individual. The psyche is the only reality and must be granted overriding empirical importance. So also is the individual, who is the only immediate manifestation of the psyche. There's a very strong individual focus. The individual is paramount. So do you see my dilemma? Relationalism, individualism. So, is there a contradiction between these? I was able to resolve this between the relational lens and solitude, and the understanding of how relationships fit into our psyche in the same way as solitude fits into our psyche. If you read that book, I'm sure many of you will find it really interesting. It is, you know, the importance of us as we grow up to learn detachment, to learn to manage on ourselves, to learn those things and yet still be in contact and relationship. And you look at all of Jung, I call him the master of paradox. Okay, let's look at what he does. He talks about change. I mean, all of us are in a constant process of change, and yet he talks about our inner nature. I don't go as far as him saying that our personality is innate, because he was ambiguous on that. At times he said, well, one might as well call it being innate because it seems to appear very early. But I think we don't understand what innate means anyway. But do you see the idea of this paradox of there's a thing which says it doesn't change or it doesn't change very much, and then that other side where it says individuation is the whole goal and it's all about change. Similarly, he saw himself as a scientist, and yet he wrote the introduction to the I Ching. Okay? He bridges such a broad range of understanding and knowledge. He's got this idea of dichotomy, but his whole philosophy is about reintegration. Okay? And so typology versus uniqueness. We all can be classified, but we're all unique. This all seems paradoxical to people at first. So, the master of paradox and the idea of how the individual fits into society. Looking at Jung as a scientist, I mean, what did he say as a scientist? He said, show me the average pebble. The average pebble is grey-brown and 145 grams. Okay? Find it. You will not find a single pebble that fits that description. And so he developed this thing which is that the whole methodology of science is to average, to find, to generalize. Now, I'm not saying there's not a value in that, but let's understand what we're doing with that. And we have outliers. And in fact, we even have statistical techniques. The jackknife technique is one where, if there are any outliers, you jackknife them out so that you can make your generalizations better. That is the methodology of science. And so if we look at, and he called them statistical man. I've added woman because we're in a modern age, all right? Statistical man and woman. That is the average face when you put all of the faces together of a woman in Germany. Did you know that? And France and England. They all look very similar. I see a lot more diversity when I walk around Germany, France and England than that. You can just get this on the internet, okay? There they are. Those are 3 average faces of air crew, okay, in 3 different airlines. Okay. Now, we need to understand that science has a biased lens on the world. Okay? I mean, as Jung makes the point in synchronicity, where he says that is it philosophically possible that there is a unique event? Could we say it's no, 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 no? Is it philosophically possible? He says yes. And how will science deal with that? Science will say, do it again, Sam. And it will then scotch it out as an aberration, a coincidence, a misreading. Okay? So whether you believe that there is a replicability of everything in the universe, or there can be unique events, you need to recognize that the scientific lens is looking down that particular path and will ignore anything that is unique. And that's what he's saying about, and when we look at individuals, at people, you know, we are looking at the average, not the uniqueness. And what was Jung so strong on? The uniqueness of the individual. That apparently is the average woman in 2050. So we can see what direction or what projections they're making with that. And I'm afraid that our outliers will, I think, be cut out of the picture. Okay? So this idea of averaging and generalization is one which, on the one hand, useful, and on the other hand, as Jung was saying, it has enormous problems. And Jung's attitude to society, which is strongly made in the undiscovered self. It's a different version of this. I got this ages ago, and it's a really nice silver one, which means I never lose it because I can always spot it from wherever. And if you buy it now, it looks like that. Okay? But in there, he says, organizations, political, religious, wrote the individual into a social organization and reduced him to a condition of diminished responsibility. This is strong language. Okay? Instead of raising him out of the torn, mindless mass and making it clear to him that he is the one important factor, and that the salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul. A strong view of what it means to have a collective. Now, in trying to understand that, I think it's very important that we recognize the conditions, the environment, the situation in which he was writing this. Okay? And if we look at that, the reality of the time, he was well aware of such people as Louis XIV, l'État c'est moi, the state is me. And much later, Charles de Gaulle, la France c'est moi. Okay? But the real things that Jung was really concerned about were these despots. Okay? And thinking around that background, we can understand a lot more about how he was so strong against the idea of collectivism and the reducing of the individual and diminished responsibility of the individual. So, he had a strong antagonism to the tyranny of the state, and he makes statements like this: the future depends on our ability to resist society's mass movements. So, having said that, let us also look at another side of this. And what I'd like you all to do is a little exercise, okay? So I'd like you to pair up. Your challenge is that you are going to play thumb war. I need to do a count now. How many people got at least 5? How many people got 6, 7, 8? So not many. We have a couple here who've seen. How many did you get?
About 20.
About 20. How did they do that? Cheating. Is it cheating, James? James, come here. Let's show them. We're going to play thumb war. I want to get as many as possible. What do you want?
Well, I want to get as many as possible.
Well, why don't we cooperate then? Okay? Okay, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. Okay? An illustration of how we approach everything with a lens. And we are so geared into the individual level. And it pervades, I mean, it certainly pervades my discipline. So, in all of this, let's recognise as well that Jung is not simplistic when he talks about collectivism and individualism, because he makes this statement as well. And this is the bridge for me, which helps me to reconcile the apparent paradox. To understand human psychology, it is absolutely essential that we study him, her, in his, her environment. And now let's think about how we look at the study and think about people. There's an enormous backdrop to this. So my challenge in bringing together individualism and collectivism, and I'll talk about this guy a little bit later on because he comes into this as well, and therefore this paradox between these two positions is learning to think relationally, which is what I did with Jane. I'm not just thinking of me, I'm also thinking of you, and we are sharing our goals. And now, when we look at business psychology, what are we doing when we are selecting people? We are selecting people to collaborate. But what do? We assess them individually. We have a role. We have the competencies for that role. We try to get people who've got as many of those as possible. So we are thinking individually. The same is true when we do development. I mean, what is leadership development? I think Jane's got a lot of potential. So I'll tell you what, I will pluck her out of her current network of relationships here and take her and give this experience over there, and I treat her as a unit. Now there is something in the unit, but what we are blind to is the dark matter between Jane and everyone else in the room and everyone else in the organisation. So that is a fundamental bias in psychology. This is also a fundamental bias in the broader culture. Our organisations are still saying people are our important asset, most important asset, but we are focusing individually on that. Now, individualism is important, but so is working together. All right? And if it is true, I don't know a company that doesn't say people are our most important asset. But if it was true, what would they be doing differently? They'd be doing a lot differently. So we're missing something, and one of the key things is, and this is a little sidetrack here, okay, which is, if people were so important, we would know what's important to them. How many managers know what is really important to you? No, I assume that you share our company values, and that's what's important to you, and I assume that. What is really important to you? Okay, which means understanding their values. And so In that, if people are our most important asset and understanding other people's values, do we understand our own values? Could you write down your top 3 values? Have a go. I know you're just going to put a label and that will need a lot of interpreting, but what are your top values? And if you can think quickly, maybe you'll think about someone that you work with and say, could I do the same with what's important to them as well? And I'm using this sidetrack as an illustration of how I think that what we say about people being important in psychology, which should be placing people right in the middle, is missing some fundamental stuff. Because if we look at, and I don't know what you've written, I doubt if many of you put hedonism, or else you wouldn't be in here now, would you? Clearly. Okay. Altruism, that may be one that is featuring there somehow in your little list. Okay? All these people who, in this space, talk about making a difference and making other people's lives. There's an altruistic driver in many of the people in this room. Affiliation, why are you here on a Saturday? Well, there's an affiliation thing going on here. That might be important too. So there's a whole load of things. Now this is one of the models of values. And I look at that and I think, that doesn't get to my heart. It doesn't get to my heart. Why? What is it? If this is one, and it is, you know, one of the most sort of used values questionnaires and all, that's their model. Why is it that? What is it missing? Now let's think about some of the things that you have written down. Many times when I run this exercise, people say family. Okay? Family values. And I say that doesn't come into the model of values that I use for a very good reason. Because every label is a multifaceted thing. And when I think about that family, I think, what is it about family that's important to you? Perhaps it's to do with inclusion. I am part of something, I'm belonging. Or perhaps it's to do with connection. It's not the belonging sense, but it's the intimacy element of it. Or perhaps it is the fact that there is just social contact. Or perhaps it is that we can do things together. And do you see how you can break these things down into different components? And when people say family to me, the same, people using the same label could have quite different things that are important to them about the family. Openness, etc. So if you consider what you wrote down, whatever they are, and I've just picked a load of things, you did tell me who was going earlier, is you look at all of these. I don't know if they featured in any of your lists there, but one of the things with this is almost, I can't think of any of them that doesn't have some meaning without being in relationship. And in fact, I think about, even the introvert hermit is in relationship. Whether it's with God, or whether it's the artist in his attic room, and doing things, and I don't want to show it to anybody, but there is still something about who it's for, in relationship with. Maybe it's in relationship with a generalized other, but there's always an element of relationship in all of these things. And so, to make this point a little bit more, and trying to put some framework around values, we've talked about dividing it into 4 areas. What I want for myself, like fame and reward and excitement, etc. What I want to become, like career progression or personal growth or whatever. What I want from society, where the altruism and harmony, and I don't want to live in a terrorist sort of dominated world, etc. But this area is so neglected. When you look at the breakdown of what is important to people, so what I call this sort of, what I want from others, the relational component. So I'm using this to say that even people who are very clearly trying to map people and the importance of values are not really picking up on the relational space. So back on track now, okay? So, are relationships neglected in the way in which we operate? My suggestion is that they are, and why are they? Because if you ask a fish, what is the importance of water? What will it say? What is water? It's surrounded by it, it becomes invisible. Relationships, we're surrounded by them, they become invisible. We take them for granted. We expect them to happen. We expect us all to be experts in them. To be honest, none of us are experts enough in them. And so, it's only when you come out of it that you may be able to see it. So this is the thing about the dark matter in organisations. We don't see it, we haven't put enough on it, and what we need is a new pair of glasses to say, let's now bring this into focus so we can bring it to the table and give it the due attention that it needs. And to understand again why we are neglecting it, look at where we are. This is our model. Certainly in Western society, we start young and we start dependent. And what happens is we begin to say boo to our parents and not listening to them. We are developing our independence. Sometimes we don't do it for long enough, okay? And eventually we go on the hero's journey, and that is St. George, who has broken free, got independence, showed his... Sorry, I remember you telling me I'd just get a silhouette if I stand over there on the video. And if you think about it, this is the model of maturity, which is epitomised by the Statue of Liberty. It is the growth from dependence to independence. So, just as Jung said, people get stuck. I think our society has got stuck. There is nothing wrong, and it's perfectly natural to go from dependence to independence. It's a necessary process, but it is not the whole process. What is independence? Let's look at it. And this is someone, again, I haven't brought her book along either, but Margaret Wheatley has written a lot about this, a physicist who talks and says, actually nothing exists except in relationship. We do not know that a neutrino exists without opposing something else. It is only in relationship that you see these things. And I read that really interesting thing years ago of the person who said, all that parapsychology stuff, this is a physicist. He said, we make a big assumption when we say that a positron exists. Why do we say it? Because electrons disappear. And why? Well, positron meets electron, boom, they cancel each other out. And in this article, this was in New Scientist or something, he was saying, just as reasonable a concept is, think of an electron moving forward in time and an electron moving backwards in time. What happens when they meet? They disappear. Okay? And so he was trying to get some conceptual thing around some of maybe parapsychology. But anyway, a model of maturity then, this is where I think we've got stuck in the West. Okay, don't depend on anybody. Me, and the number of times I see the me, and I must stand alone. And recognising that when we go from dependence to independence, there is another stage. And that other stage is to interdependence. Okay? And if you map then, what I had on the values things, we go from the things I want now, okay, to the things I want to become. Okay? And then we've got what I want from others. It's following the child to adolescent to parent. Parenting is another metaphor for that where I am not the centre of the universe. I'm not everything. There are these other things, and it's letting go. It's one of the ways in which we learn to let go of the ego, although many of us parents fail to do that miserably. So, why relationships? And another quote from Margaret Wheatley. Okay, so...
Which book of verses is this?
I don't know. Online.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I can't read it.
She's done a lot of stuff on leadership. She's written a lot, so I couldn't actually pinpoint it down. Now, interdependence is not new. I mean, if we look back to this fellow, again, you may not recognise him because he was dead a long time ago, but John Donne, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. I mean, we know this, and yet we haven't focused on it. And I do think it is, certainly in the Western world, that we have got a cultural heritage that independence is a goal. That is the ultimate. Okay? And that therefore we've got stuck there. So, why is it not more central? There's another problem with psychology and business psychology, which is it has to be evidence-based. So it's immediately into the replication, okay? And it is also distorted by the fact that what we are trying to investigate is hugely difficult. And the story here is, walking down the road, what are you doing? I'm looking for my keys. Oh, did you drop them here? No, I dropped them over there, but it's dark. So I thought I'd look here. We look for where we can find evidence, even if it's stupid. So, but again, don't think I don't accept the value of evidence-based practice. I wish our politicians would do a lot more evidence-based practice when they say, I think. I want to say, why? How did you get to that? What are the bits? Is that really, I'm quite comfortable with it, but it has a bias. So, a personal example then. Who here has thought about their pension? Who's looking after their pension? Yeah? Not very well. Okay. So, I wonder what you're doing about it. When I was given this challenge, do you know what came into my mind? The fact that I didn't pay into an insurance pension scheme. And Michael Schluter, who is a co-author of the Relational, said, Roy, I don't mean that. I mean your relational pension. He said, when you're old, the most important thing will not be the money in the bank, money coming in. If you've got a minimum, it'll be the people that you can be with, interact with, the relational pension. And so this again is an example of how all of these things, we have a bias and we think about things in a certain way. Think about your relational pension. Think about who you're going to be with when you can't walk out of the house, etc. Just because I'm looking like I'm getting close to that. So, we need new glasses. And new glasses like, I'm going to buy a microwave. What do you think about if you go buy a microwave? How much it costs? Yeah? You might think, well, where are we going to put it? What does it look like? Okay. What damage does it do to the environment, etc.? How many people in looking and buying a microwave think, I wonder what impact this is going to have on family life. I wonder what it's going to do to the kids coming in and doing a quick meal and going up and playing, etc., etc. A relational lens is something that we need to bring to focus on every aspect of our lives. A country example. This is a little place called Roseto in Pennsylvania. There's also a place called Roseto in Sicily, by the way. And in fact, it's called Roseto because 11 people from Sicily went there back in 18 whatever. And what is interesting about Roseto is that there was a doctor who went to a convention and he turned to the doctor next to him and said, what do you do about all these people with heart attacks? And he says, we don't have any. Not quite as stark as that, but the number of heart attacks they had in Roseto was way lower than in other parts of the US. So this doctor, who was also an academic, said, I am going to investigate why that is. And he did everything that he could think of. Lifestyle, food, did you have a car, did you cycle, all of those things. There was no difference from the people in Roseto from anybody else in the United States. This is in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers. Okay? It's an outlier which becomes the focus, and that is so important. The exceptions are the important things. And in that then, he eventually came to the conclusion that the difference was that they still live in communities, because they built it on a Sicilian village model. And the houses were close together, and there were 3 stories, and the grandma was living upstairs or downstairs, etc., etc. And you could talk to the neighbours across, as they do in it. And in the end, he said, that's the only difference I can see, saying therefore that relationships were the key to the better health of these people. And that's not far from New York. Well, you might call it far if you're British, but not if you're American. Okay? So, an organisational example. What was analysed in Search of Excellence? What is the lens that we use when we look at organisations? It's primarily a financial lens. And 43 of 50 companies were no longer there 10 years later. Okay? So what were they missing? My thesis is we did not understand the relationships in the organisations and what was needed to keep those companies where they were. So, you may have heard of triple bottom line reporting. It is an emerging discipline, but triple bottom line, PPP, profit, planet, and people. Okay? Instead of just reporting on money, you report on the environmental impact and you report on the people health that you have. And people don't know how to do it. Okay? In fact, now there is something called the International Integrated Reporting Council framework, which has 6 capitals. Okay? And social is one of them. And this is something which is growing and may well become the standard, which is that organisations are going to have to report on their relationships. All mergers and acquisitions, we know most of them fail. And why do they fail? Because they haven't understood the relationships that are going on in there. Now, that's why the subtitle to the book says, Understanding, Managing and Measuring Stakeholder Relationships. We need advance warning. You know, this has been used significantly in South Africa, where King 3 has done all this sort of guideline for industry, and they have to report on these things. And so they've been using the model inside this book for trying to assess what's going on with organisations and picking up relationships with the regulators are awful, relationships with our suppliers has gone down. You know, relationships here have gone up, and there's so many relationships to audit, but we are going to need to do it. So the relational lens then goes into the why, the what, the how. It was written relationally. The 4 of us used to meet regularly and chat. And then one of us would have to go away and capture that and put it into thing. That took 10 years. And I tell you, a lot of that was the mess that came out of it after all of that. And in the end, we had to get someone to pull a thread through it all to get that book published. Published by Cambridge University Press. It's a body of thinking. There is a model in there, and there are very practical applications. The idea of relational health has been applied in prisons. I mean, think of we release people from prison back into the community where they were, where their wife's been, without them for 10 years, and these people are just expected to go back in. We don't think relationally about what we're doing with these things. So, Michael Schluter, in fact, developed what was called the relational proximity model, and that was in 1993. And in there, he posits 5 key dimensions for examining relationships. Okay? And then I met him in 2002. He published the R option, where he started working on the book, and he pulled some of that out to be the relational manager, and then we published this one, as I say, just last year. And what the relational proximity model in there is he's saying something which we all know. In fact, you can often find wisdom in the ancients. And so when we look at what this man said, he said, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right person, in the right way, that is not easy. Anyone recognise it? Aristotle. Okay, and that then are the 5 components of the relational proximity model: contact, power, time, direction, and context. And they're given names which are not brilliant: directness, parity, continuity, commonality, and multiplexity. And it's captured there. And one of the contributions I brought as a psychologist to this is I moved that into a much deeper layered model, so that what we have then is how each of these look at the behavioural, at the cognitive, and at the affective level. And so You know, what does it look like? What do people do? What can be observed? Okay, what is going on inside? This is the cognitive. What are people thinking? What's being analysed? And then at the affective, what's the impact? What are people feeling? And you'll see that throughout the model, which comes then into this. So it becomes a 5, 15, and there are 2 facets underneath that. So it becomes quite a complex model. But this is what is being then used, and being used in 2 ways. For auditing stakeholder relationships, but it's also being used to audit and look at individual pair relationships. And in this, what is so important is the perception of both parties. If I'm saying, how do I get on with my wife? 5. Do I have enough directness with her? Yeah, I see her at the end of the day. If her perception is I never see him, we need to talk about that. Now, maybe we do talk about that, but very often things don't get talked about. So the application of relational thinking, there's relational architecture. Architects should be thinking about the space that they are creating that allows relationships to flourish, relational prisons, relational justice, peacekeeping. This model has been used for peacekeeping in the Sudan, and there are current initiatives in terms of in Ukraine, and in fact in North and South Korea, ongoing at the moment. And then we've got this bunch. I had the good fortune to be living in Maidenhead, so I wrote to Theresa May after Brexit and said, why don't we have a chat? I'm your constituent, by the way. So I went to see her, and I suggested to her that these people might not be the best at building relationships. And why don't they have a relational coach in the Brexit negotiations, etc.? She hasn't taken it up, I don't think. We only have 15 minutes. It turned out to be 25 minutes, but there you are. And she did put us in touch with her chief policy advisor, who is interested in some of the ideas, but they have to shoehorn it into the things that they're doing. And so to summarise, relationism, collectivism is different. And Jung's antagonism to collectivism, I don't think, would be in the same way an attitude towards relationism. And type uses, I believe, focuses too much on the individual and often the stuckness of the individual. And we know that Jung was saying it's a navigation system for change. You know, there's not enough concept of change. There's too many people, in my view, say I'm an ENTJ. I'm not a bloody well, I'm an INFP, by the way. I'm not one of those either. Okay, I am all of these in different spaces. Context is important. So let's remember Jung's focus, which was not Freud's reductive view, explain everything by precedent and how we have become what we are. Jung's view is quite different. It is a synthetic view, which is to explain the purpose of what we are becoming. And that is such a fundamental difference between these two people, supposedly from the same discipline. So moving type into a relational space, which is what we've tried to do with the type mapping system, is let's look more at the inside and let's get people away from identifying true type. Let's listen to the internal dialogue that's going on, which says, well, I think I prefer this, but sometimes I prefer that. Allow people the doubt, so that they can then grow instead of having to get to best fit type. That's the personal bugbear I have. Then there's the outside, okay? Let's consider context, because I know that I act differently in different situations, and I'm quite comfortable doing that as well. And as my wife always said, you were talking to your sister, weren't you? How do you know? Because you change, okay? Big Brother comes out in a different way in that context than when I'm dealing with Donald Trump. Okay, and in between. So, the apparent paradox, one-sided development, and I think this is where we have the problem. What we have in our politics is one-sided views. Marine Le Pen. I can't remember who that guy is. These people. One-sided. Now, if you think of what's happened in our political life, I mean, so when Cameron said, let's vote on leaving the EU, you know, any big constitutional change would normally have, well, you've got to have a 2/3 majority or something, didn't say any of that, 52 to 48%. Our job now is not to continue the vitriol of a campaign. Same for Donald Trump. You don't consider, because we are now in the process of rebuilding those relationships, and therefore we have to acknowledge and respect both sides. We have to listen to both. There's a lot of good argument on the Brexit side, and there's a lot of good argument on the Remain side, and there is a lot of uncertainty. We are where we are, and managing those two sides is what we need to do. And I put behind that, if we think relationally, that will be a lens that will transform many of these negotiations or whatever they are. Because the danger is that we will be seesawing from one side to the other. You know, let's go out, let's go in, etc. And the European Union is in that. So I end then with listening to Martin Seligman, who was asked, what is the state of psychology today? And he said, and then the cameraman said, but you've only got one word. He said, well, good. And the cameraman said, that's not a very good story. Okay, okay, you've got 2 words. And Seligman said, well, it's not good. And the cameraman said, oh, well, you need 3 words then. And he said, not good enough. And I think that where we are is not good enough. And so in some way, this is what I'm tussling with. That's my journey to being here, working however you can. But thanks very much. Why the relational lens? One of my favourite quotes. Do you know who said that? I mean, who doesn't agree with that? Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'm Roy.